You're listening to Kitchen Table Finance. Join Dave Shotwell and Nick Nauta as they cut through the complexity of financial planning and serve bites of investment advice that are both personal and practical.
Hey, Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Good. Beautiful,
Good.
sunny day.
It feels
A little
like
chilly for my
spring.
taste, but it's probably more the weather of your
Hey,
people, right?
I mowed my lawn yesterday for the first time all spring. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, big event.
Impressive.
I know.
When's the snow coming then?
Right. That's pretty much it. We're done for the year. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we are back at it with another episode of Retirement Planning Headlines, where you and I, Dave, do the heavy lifting so that our listeners don't have to, or they can pick and choose the ones that we decide are interesting for them, right?
Right. We're the filter.
That's right. So, first up on our list of headlines is 5 investing mistakes anyone can make. Coming
Yeah.
to us from Morningstar and our friend Christine Benz.
Yeah. I loved this because she basically just, self-aware, like, look, here she is, a financial professional, financial writer, weekly column in a major news source, and here's the things that I do wrong, and here's the things that I know. And I think what I like about it, and I think you'd agree with this, is it really just shows that there is no one size fits all advice, and it's not all about just maximizing dollars, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. She admits that she holds too much cash,
Mm-hmm.
has too few bonds in her portfolio compared to what she would advise someone else do. She's slow to make contributions that she knows she should make, and she holds too much employer stock. I love the fact she published in Morningstar that she holds too much for employer stock. That's gutsy.
Right.
But good on her, and I think folks should read it not for the specific points that she makes, but just the overall point that you know you're going to see a lot of advice out there. A lot of it is good, but not all of it is easy to follow, and sometimes you got to pick and choose what works for you.
Yeah, it just seems human nature to, kind of fall, nobody's perfect, right? Everybody falls short
Right,
on certain things. And even if you
right,
know exactly what you should be doing, doesn't mean that
right,
you're actually going to go out and
right,
execute perfectly every time,
right,
right?
right. Right. There have been times when people have asked me what I do, and I have to admit that when you deal with other people's money all day, sometimes it's hard to remember to do the right things for yourself.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I
You
struggle
know.
with that too, just in terms
Yeah.
of, doing those things. And, we know what the right answers are, but it's kind of,
Right. Right.
and that's part of the problem with, the world today. The right answers are out there. There's all the
Hmm.
information, but it's like, how do you translate that into action? Right.
Right.
I think
Well,
everybody
and
struggles with that.
yeah, yeah, and being objective with your own
Oh
stuff
yeah.
is just never easy.
Well, it's like the
So,
the doctors at the hospital that all tell everybody not to smoke when they're out back
right.
having a smoke
Right. Yeah,
break.
the statistics on doctors and nurses who smoke is ridiculous. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's a good example.
So our next article comes to us from none other than the Wall Street Journal, Dave.
Yes.
There is some new math on driving your car till the wheels fall off, apparently.
Right.
Although I will tell you, when I went through the article, I didn't see the math. But they brought up what I thought were
Right.
some interesting points. And kind of the main headline here is that the cost of car ownership is going up, and so that makes the case for driving your car until the wheels fall off a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
There's some people that have bought into this for a long time. It just depends on how you think of a vehicle, right? Like if you think of it as a use asset, then it's best to extract as much value out of it for as little cost as possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of echoes an article that we saw last month, I think was on our list from Yahoo, that was very similar about how the dynamics of the car industry between used and new cars has
Right.
changed. There was one bit of math in this article that I really like. This is something I've always kind of wanted a rule of thumb for and never really had one, and that's the consider selling your car when the cost of repair is going to be 10% or more of what it would cost to replace the car.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. I'm gonna that's my main takeaway from this because I get asked that from clients quite often, and it's never an easy one for me to answer.
Right.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the problem with, because I kind of subscribe to the drive a car until the wheels fall off
Hmm.
philosophy is, at what point are you getting nickel and dimed on the
Yeah.
repairs versus like what
Yeah.
it would just cost you to buy a new car? Like that's a hard
Exactly.
math problem to figure out.
Yeah.
And I like having some sort of reference point of, okay, like if you're getting up over that 10% range, maybe that's
Yeah.
time to start looking into, buying a new car. I think that's a good,
Yeah.
if nothing else, I don't know if 10% is the right number, but I think 10% is a good spot to like stop and
Well,
think about it, right?
think about
Like,
it. Yeah. Yeah.
how does a new car fit into this versus that repair? Like, where's that going to put me
Right.
budget wise? Like, that's a great,
Right.
at least like, hey, I need to think
It's
about
a
this.
yeah, like all the other rules of thumb out there that we use, they're at least a good beginning point to make
Yeah,
decisions.
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also thought it was interesting, the newer models are a little bit more expensive to repair, which I thought was an interesting take. And it kind of makes sense with all the technology that's in them now. It's like
Hmm.
these things are loaded with cameras and technology. And if something goes wrong on that end, it's a lot
Yeah.
different than, the
Yeah.
traditional. I don't know
Yeah.
anything about cars, so I'm going to throw out something. Some car guy's going to send me an email, but like changing the radiator or something. I don't know. Like that stuff they've been doing for years, but like the technical side of like changing a camera or the technology, I think is a
What's
lot more costly than like the normal engine repairs, right?
yeah. So much is well, I've got an old Jeep Wrangler that has a computer module that burned out that is extremely costly to replace,
Yeah.
and everything mechanically works fine on it, but it doesn't have a radio, a speedometer, or a gas gauge. So because that's all computer driven. But 5 years before that, it would have been analog, right? And it would
Right.
have been a
Yeah.
part that somebody could swap out. And I think interestingly along those lines is like my wife and I have the same vehicle, 3 model years different, and
Uh-huh.
the changes in hers with in terms of just the electronics is interesting and how
Oh yeah.
fast that becomes obsolete. And then we'll go on a trip in her car where it's real easy to like have the navigation work and everything. I'll
Right.
get in mine just like mechanically, just like it, seats are the same, controls are the same. It doesn't have the same electronics, and it's like,
Right.
oh boy, I really miss the fact that I can just push a button that says home.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
It's funny. I remember my dad always complaining and not want like, the more technology you get on these things, the more problems it causes when they breaks. As he's like reaching over the seat to roll down the manual window.
Right, right. I
uh,
remember when my daughter we were watching some show that was set in the past where they actually had a crank window, and she looked at me and said, "That's why they call it rolling down the window." Like it was an epiphany that, oh my gosh. And it is funny that we still call it that. And we
yep,
haven't had a crank window
absolutely.
since
That is
before
funny.
she was born. Anyway, we should move on, dating ourselves here.
Yeah. Our next article comes from CNBC, and it's entitled Americans Can't Stop Spaving, and here's how to avoid
Yes,
that trap. So, I guess
which
first and
I
foremost,
thought was
Dave,
a
what's
typo
spaving?
when I read it.
Right?
So, yeah, it's the psychological trick where you end up spending more because you think you're saving more.
Right.
Did I define
Yeah.
that well? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
Okay. So,
Spend
for
more to
instance,
save more.
buy one get one free.
Yep.
Um, you know, buy two get the third at 50% off.
Yep.
Do this idea of trying to get the best value for your dollar, and you end up buying things you do not need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Yeah.
And some interesting quotes from Dr. Klontz, who does a lot in the psychology,
Hmm.
behavioral finance realm. And it's just kind of, it's spaving is justifying our desire to buy more, right? So
Yeah.
like, and the
Yeah.
one thing that stood out to me that he said is, teams of scientists have figured out how to extract more money out of you. Like
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
marketing machine is
Yeah.
phenomenal and very
Yeah.
tuned in, and they know exactly what to say,
Yeah.
exactly what percentage off to do. Like
Right.
there's, they're very, very good at it. And you
Right.
have to be conscious of that.
Right.
Because if not, they will, have no problems taking advantage of you when it comes to
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah. That just the whole science behind whether something's going to be $3.99 instead of $4,
Oh yeah.
is
Yep.
all a big psychological anchoring exercise. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I thought it was good. They kind of went over in the article some ways to avoid or some things to think about. So one was quieting the noise. We live in this virtual world, so we all have shopping apps with notifications and newsletters about the
Yeah.
latest deals. And if that's something
Yeah.
that you struggle with, maybe deleting those and not getting those newsletters or not having the
Hmm.
shopping apps to kind of save yourself from that, which I think is a really great idea. This is one we've talked about before as well, Dave, and that's pay with cash. And like we've talked about on this show before, for some people, cash is easier to spend. For some people,
Right.
credit cards are easier to spend. So it just kind of depends on who you are. But really, just the first step of that is knowing who you are and what's going to help you in that regard.
Right. Right.
Doing the math, right? Like there's a lot of things out there around like, well, if you buy 3, then you get this percentage off, that kind of thing, where if you did the math, you'd realize that, the savings are the same.
Yes.
And so just kind of thinking through those things, and really to go back to another behavioral economist, Daniel Kahneman, of the thinking fast, thinking slow, right? Slow
Yes.
down, think about it
Yes.
instead of
Use
just going
system
with the
2.
gut
Yeah.
instinct of, oh, $20 off, right?
Yeah, yeah. Look at the look there. I read an article a couple weeks ago. I did not flag it for this, but it made me think of it when I saw this one about a study into Black Friday sales, where a lot of it was just this: you were paying the same price you would have paid the week before, but they worded it like a sale, and
Right.
at least the unit costs were the same. Like they had a
Yeah.
$50 pair of jeans, and it's like buy 2 for $100, and all everybody thinks they're getting a deal, and
Yeah.
because it's Black Friday, they just assume there's a sale associated with it,
Right.
and didn't even really bother to check what the unit cost was before the sale and after the sale.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, my point of view is, hey, I'm already at the mall. I might as well buy everything now, so I don't have to come back here. But
Right.
I may be a little
So
different in that.
I like this next tip too, which is steer clear of temptation. I
Yeah,
thought this was interesting. Ordering online instead of browsing the store, right? Like I think of
yeah.
my wife and her Target run where she ends up with 10
Mhm.
things in her cart she didn't need to begin with.
Yeah,
I think that's how
yeah.
Target stays in business, to be honest with you.
Well, I think you can fall into the same. I know myself. I have to watch myself. I'll go on a particular website to buy a particular thing, and then I'm scrolling around to see. Well, if I'm going to pay the shipping on that, I might as well.
Right. Yeah.
So you do have to watch it. Yeah,
Yeah. Amazon's great at that, right? Like you put something
yeah.
in your cart and oh, you might like this or this.
Yeah. Well,
Like they
lately,
get how that works too.
I looked at something at one of my favorite online sites the other day and talked myself out of it. And an hour later, I had an email from the company saying, "Hey, this is still available."
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh boy, you
Yep.
know, there's
For
only 3
sure.
of these left in stock. You liked this
Oh
an
yeah,
hour
that's my
ago.
favorite.
So yeah,
The limited stock that never
all
runs
yeah,
out.
yeah, false sense of scarcity. All
And
kinds of games I could play.
I'm sure this one has been said before, but it's that same philosophy of don't go to the grocery store hungry. Or
Hmm.
now in this day and age, my grocery store allows you to have an adult beverage or two while you're shopping, which is
Right.
never ends up
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah. 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 All of a sudden,
Well, ends
everything
up
looks
well for
good.
them, I suppose.
Yeah. Extra potato chips that day for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, and then the other two on the list were create shopping hurdles. So Amazon's famous
Hmm.
for their one-click buy. Like
Oh
your
yeah.
credit card's already in there. Make
Yeah.
it as frictionless as possible. And so
All the
thinking
sites that
about
will let you
deleting
use
your
pay.
payment
Yeah.
details. Yeah,
PayPal, Shopify, it's so much easier.
yeah,
And if
yeah.
you've got just the act of having to go, if you're online, having to pull your wallet out and find your credit card and, figure all that out might slow you down enough if you don't have
Oh,
PayPal
for
or
sure.
one of those other things set up. Yeah.
Yep. And then this is one that I use quite often too, which is just a time rule. So give yourself 24
Hmm.
hours, right? If you're at the store looking at
Yeah.
something, you're not sure, put it up back on the shelf, take a day,
Yeah.
and if you really want it, go
Yeah.
back and get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that also is helpful for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I've used that myself.
Our next article comes from Kiplinger, and it is on maintaining healthcare costs in retirement and kind of how to
Yeah.
think about healthcare costs. And actually, it wasn't too much about the actual cost of healthcare, but just really some good, solid advice around like instead of
Hmm.
obsessing and worrying over what you're going to pay for healthcare, control what you can
Yeah.
control, right? You can't
Yeah.
control the cost of healthcare or the cost you pay for insurance, but you can. Number one on the list is maintain a healthy lifestyle, right?
Right. Right.
And
Which
there's a
gives me
lot
the
of things you can do
opportunity.
there that won't cost you anything.
Right. It gives us the opportunity to throw in a Charlie Munger quote. We're always looking for a good Charlie Munger quote. Nobody
I love it.
survives open heart surgery better than the guy who didn't need the procedure in the first place.
That's right.
Right. And I think in that case, he wasn't necessarily talking about health and open heart surgery exactly, but, you know, fits the, uh, fits the context here for sure.
Indeed. The second one is boost your retirement savings. And I guess, what I would say is, well, oftentimes when we're creating financial plans, we are pulling out the healthcare costs as a separate line item so that we can adjust them based on the inflation of healthcare, which is, closer to 6% than the normal long-term inflation of 2.5%. And so I think that's a helpful way of thinking of it. I don't necessarily know. And so, if you have a shortfall, increasing your retirement savings, or this next one, which is utilizing a health savings account, might help to cover or plan for some of those
Hmm.
larger costs in retirement. I think the big thing is understanding what those costs are likely to be and planning for them and planning for the
Right.
inevitability that they're going to go up faster than what normal regular
Yeah.
inflation is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then number 4 on this list is consider your retirement age, right? There's a big difference between retiring at 62 and 65 in terms of health insurance coverage, right? At
Hmm.
65, you're more than likely going to qualify and receive Medicare, but at 62, you're going to probably need a private plan if you don't have some sort of
Right.
plan with your employer that you get in retirement. So there's some considerations that go into that. And I like this last one, which is live like you're already retired and kind of think about how that's going to be and what that's going to look like, just to kind of plan that out before you pull the trigger. Which I think, I'm not sure how much it has to do with healthcare costs, is just kind of a good rule of thumb, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's number 5 on the list. So
Yeah. Good. Good.
let's see. Our next article, Dave, is all about men. Men who are truly happy in their retirement usually adopt these daily habits. So, author Ethan Sterling puts it, happiness in retirement isn't about a bulging bank account or an endless holiday. It's about how you live your everyday life. And so he
Right.
kind of followed around some men who have successfully retired, and he kind of laid out 9 separate things that they all, or separate traits or things that they all
Yeah.
kind of did, which I thought was interesting. So, in no particular order, well, I guess the order that he gave them to us in, embrace routine, right? Which I think is
Yeah.
good in terms
Yeah,
of,
especially moving into retirement. Yeah. All of a sudden
yeah,
the routine of work life is gone. Replace it with be intentional. is what that says to me.
Yeah.
Don't just get up when you feel like getting up. Maybe do it for the first week of retirement. Have a little fun,
Yeah.
live a little, right?
For
But
sure.
doesn't mean you go without a schedule, get things done, do things
Hmm.
routinely. You'll be happier. I liked that.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay active, which I guess is no surprise, right?
Right. Back to the
Get
last
up, get
article we just
moving.
talked about. Yeah, of
Yeah. Keep learning, which I think is a big one.
course.
A lot of people forget what they get out of work is
Hmm.
that, you have to learn new things, you have to change and adapt. And so you want to be able to continue to do that in retirement. There's lots of studies about people that keep learning, living longer, healthier lives. Same can be said with social connection, right? Staying socially
Right.
connected.
Which
A lot of
often comes
people,
from work. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people forget of the connectivity that you get during work. So we tend to focus on the bad connectivity, but there's a lot of good as well, right?
Right.
So learning how to replace that or finding things that you can do to replace that. Practicing mindfulness, which sure our listeners know I'm big on and think that's a great use of time. And a lot of mindfulness can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. It doesn't have to be there your traditional. When you think of mindfulness, you think of sitting on the ground meditating or something along those lines. But there's a lot of different mindfulness activities that don't have to be the
Yeah.
traditional meditation, and kind of just being in touch spiritually, whatever that means to you. Cherishing relationships, I think that kind of goes along with connectivity.
Yeah.
Making time for self-care, right? You got all this extra time now on your hands. Make sure you carve out some for self-care. Embracing change, which I think is kind of stands out as interesting to me in terms of, you think of retirement, like in your working years, there's always change and things that are going on. You don't,
Hmm.
you think in retirement you get to have freedom and do whatever you want, but the reality is things are going to change, the world's going to change, and the sooner you embrace that, the better off you're going to be, right?
Yeah. Less angst.
Yeah, for sure. And the last one I love, which is live with gratitude, which I think at every stage of life, every person can benefit from that. So
Sure.
it's an interesting article on just kind of taking a look at people who've been successful in retirement and trying to emulate some of the traits that they have. So
Yeah.
the next one, Dave, comes to us from CBS News, and just kind of an interesting study around retirement ages, where most Americans believe that they'll work until 65, but research shows us that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Yeah. The median age actually turns out to be 62, which surprised me a little.
Yeah, same
And
here.
7 out of 10 people stopped working before age 65.
Yeah, which I was very surprised by that number.
Yeah. But I think I think so. Part of it is that the people that we talk to about retirement planning is kind of a self-selecting group, right?
Oh, for
And I think
sure.
this next statistic kind of maybe explains that 1 out of 3 of those folks cited health issues or disability as the reason they did retire early.
Right.
And yeah, only two
It's
out of five people did it because they felt they could afford it.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. There's not a lot of planning that goes around if you don't have a choice, right?
Right, right, right.
And I think the bigger overarching takeaway that I got from this is, we can make plans all we want, but then, life happens, right? And
Right.
so, like, make plans and then make a contingency plan if your plan doesn't work out. And so I think that's, a big takeaway from this of, a lot of people don't have that choice of working as long as they want
Hmm.
to for several different reasons. A big one being health and potentially disability. And so something to think about in your planning around, what would you do if you had to stop working earlier? What would that look like? And what can you do to kind of prepare yourself for that if it does happen?
Yeah.
Um, Next, we go back to an article from Morningstar about where to stash your cash. I'm
Yeah, this
guessing
one
under the mattress isn't the
under the
top
mattress,
answer.
mayonnaise jars, neither of those were on the list. I was a little surprised, but we get this question a lot lately, right, in
Yeah.
client meetings because all of a sudden it's relevant again. I shouldn't say all of a sudden. Over the last I'm still adjusting back to like the early 2000s when we were routinely talking to people about where they're putting their cash, and then for
Yeah.
a big chunk of our career, it didn't matter because nobody in any banking situation with safe assets was paying anything noticeable.
Right.
Now it's part of the conversation again. So I liked this article and flagged it because it's basically what we tell people when they ask us that question. It's like,
Hmm.
CD, it's basically comparing savings accounts, money market mutual funds, and certificates of deposit, and when those different things make sense.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, you need to consider your liquidity needs. If you don't need the money, often using a CD is a good choice. If it's likely to be in place for a year, that sort of thing. Consider FDIC insurance. Go to bankrate.com to see where the best money market high yield savings accounts are right now. I've been telling people, and they didn't explicitly say this, but to get good rates right now, it seems like you almost have to be willing to do online banking
Yeah.
to find competitive rates because the local brick and mortar savings banks and credit unions aren't paying what you can get online through FDIC insured national banks.
Which kind of makes sense when you think about like where those companies
Hmm.
derive money from, right? Like the
Right.
local banks still have a whole bunch of, especially the credit unions have car loans and mortgages on their books at 2 and 3%.
Very
So they're not
right.
rushing to give 5%, right?
Right. And they tend to be well capitalized in that they've got a lot of money on hand already for the loan demand that they have. If you
Right.
then the flip side of what you're saying, when you look at those big national banks that are offering those higher rates in online savings, they're all affiliated with they're the bank affiliates of companies that are primarily lenders,
Right.
credit card companies, American Express Bank, Capital One Bank, Discover Bank, Ally, which is the old GMAC. So they're financing all the quick car leases and things. They need capital. So they're what we used to call in the banking business buying money by paying a
Right.
higher rate. They need your deposits to fund those loans.
For
So
sure. Which, and it
there's
makes
nothing wrong
sense.
with
Like if
that.
you
Right.
Right. If you're lending out a credit card at 22%, you're much more willing to pay
Pay
5%
5% on a savings
to get
account.
that money, right?
Exactly, exactly. So it's all good. Just watch the FDIC limits and make sure you're comfortable and
Yeah.
use good online hygiene when you're moving money around. But
Right.
you
And
know,
one last thing I'll say on this too is I would caution people not to obsess over it, right? Like
yeah,
it's one thing like to go from your bank where you're earning one to an online place where you're earning 4.5. But
right,
don't get into if you're getting 4.5 somewhere and someone's got 4.75, like
yeah. Don't,
it's
yeah,
probably not worth your time to obsess over it.
because 2 months later they'll have switched places
Right.
probably. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all
Yep.
going to average. If you're making right now, if you're making somewhere in the 4.25 and up, you're doing better than average, and probably over the long haul, you're going to be fine.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So good. All right, we're going to go back
Our
to where
last
we started
article,
here.
yeah, back to Morningstar and our friend Christine Benz in
Mhm.
her 4 financial worries to cross off your list.
Yeah, and kind of like the first article that we started with there, I liked this one because again, here she is a financial professional in financial media and writer who is recognizing that she often worries about things that don't need to be front and center in her mind. And
Right,
I think we both recognize this a lot of the times with clients. The things that they come in and say they're worried about rank really low on our list of like threats to their financial plan or their financial well-being.
right,
You know, the specific things that Christine mentions here, again, these aren't. I don't think the specific things she mentions are really the point, but she mentions, don't worry about estate tax, don't worry about gift tax. These are things that are highly unlikely to be issues in your life.
yeah,
The idea that you need hard assets to buy things with down the road, because the economy is going to go into some kind of death spiral where your cash or your non-hard assets are worth nothing.
Right.
And this one's come up occasionally for us. That the government's going to start taxing your Roth IRAs. My main takeaway, what I would say, is most people can cross anything off their list if that thing requires a whole bunch of really bad things to go wrong at once, right?
Yeah.
Because that's unlikely, or require like a lot of political will to
Right.
change, which that's where the raw, like, changes to estate tax, changes to the gift tax, changes to the taxation of Roth IRAs, that would take a whole bunch of people in Congress deciding they really didn't care what their voters thought.
Right.
And it's not
Not to
likely.
mention getting along with each other.
Right, all agreeing on it and deciding, and then okay, so estate taxes may change, gift taxes may change. Those changes aren't likely to be meant to turn the screws on your mass, your middle class Americans aren't going to bear the brunt of that,
Right. For
you
sure.
know. And if and the other thing I would add is if the things on your list require you to make like drastic, irreversible changes to your money or your life, it's probably something you should cross off your list. Like
Yeah.
doing fancy, if you're a middle class American, you don't need to do elaborate gifting strategies and trust strategies to reduce a hypothetical change in estate taxes.
Right.
Bells you can't unring. Taking all your money, translating it into Swedish gold kroners and burying it in your backyard is a hard bell to unring, right?
Yeah.
So cross those worries off your list and deal with them if they come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great
So,
advice.
yeah.
Well, that is all we got for today, Dave. To our listeners, if you have an article that you think is particularly interesting, you want to hear us talk about, feel free to shoot it to us at
Yeah.
info@srbadvisors.com. Dave, as always, it's been a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks, Nick.
This is a Zedia Media production.